Republican Senator John Thune, he has an idea to solve a big problem, but will the Democrats even consider his idea? Senator John Thune joins us live. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
All right, you have an idea on this deficit budget mess. What's your idea?
Well, I have observed for a long time since I've been here that probably the most fundamental thing that you could do to change the way that Washington works and to end sort of business as usual in Washington is to reform the budget process. We have a budget process that is broken. The last 34 years there have only been 4 times when all the appropriation bills were passed on time. There is just this inertia to spend more. And what my bill would do is it creates a joint committee on deficit reduction that would be composed of both Republicans and Democrats from both the House and the Senate, a permanent standing committee of the Congress, whose sole mission would be to reduce the deficit. And it would be required to find 10% in savings, 10% of the deficit in savings every budget cycle. It caps discretionary spending and then indexes it for inflation, and also changes the pay-go rules and makes a number of other changes in the budget process. But the short of it is, it's a way in which we can actually start putting some downward pressure on spending here in Washington, which is something that's desperately needed.
All right, under your theory, then in 10 years we wouldn't have a deficit if we're knocking off 10% per year.
Well, it's
unforeseen circumstances.
Theoretically, yes, but there again, and 10% is a floor. There's obviously, you can go beyond that, but we believe that if we're ever going to get this under control, we have to start somewhere. And this isn't going to solve it overnight, but we obviously have, I think, over the course of the 10-year period, a plan here that would save about $1 trillion minimum, and hopefully well beyond that.
All right, I like your idea. It's simple. It seems like a good idea. One problem, and it may be insurmountable, is trying to get both sides to agree. Do you think that there's any way that the Democrats will even consider your idea?
These are ideas. Some of these ideas have been around for a while. By the way, it goes to a biennial budget too, so that you're always spending money in an odd numbered year, and then when an even number year comes around, election year, you're actually trying to save money. So you do a budget every 2 years instead of every year. But I think that the key is to get as much buy-in as you can from both sides who are sincere and interested in at least creating a process whereby we can put some squeeze on the budget, or some pressure on the budget here in Washington. And I think that will take bipartisanship, but I would hope that people are ready for that, because clearly we have a problem that's out of control. This is a crisis.
But when President Obama came to office, he said that he was going to be the one who's going to solve the problem. He's going to create the bipartisan relationship. He's going to change everything. Well, that hasn't happened. I mean, people have dug their heels in the sand even deeper. What makes you think that your idea could create bipartisanship? How would you do things differently?
Well, first off, I think that he governed from the left. I mean, instead of coming to the Republicans and saying, what can we do? How can we sit down and solve some of these problems? Let's find some common ground. He basically had big majorities in Congress and decided to govern from the left. I think when you find some of these solutions that make sense, and this is a very common sense approach, that there is room for bipartisanship here, but there's got to be an effort, I think, on both sides to recognize this is a significant problem that is going to plague us for generations, and if we don't get this thing fixed, or at least get on the pathway to getting it fixed here in the next few years, it's only going to get more and more out of hand.
Do you see any effort from him to be bipartisan?
Well, I think that he will. It depends. I think we'll force him.
Have you seen it now?
I haven't seen it yet, but what I'm hoping is that if we can pick up some seats in November, then he will be required at least to negotiate with Republicans. He hasn't had to, because he's had such big majorities in the House and the Senate, which is why many of us are arguing that we need some checks and balances here, and hoping that the November elections will provide that.
All right. In terms of bipartisanship, then of course the issue of the Bush tax cuts, I'll put that on the table too, because they're supposed to expire in January. There is no bipartisan discussion on this particular issue.
Well, there are some Democratic senators who are expressing an openness now to allowing the tax cuts to be extended based upon the concern that they would have about what it would do to the economy to raise taxes right now.
So they would be going rogue against President Obama.
Correct.
And that's not going to make President Obama very happy, or a lot of the leadership.
Well, and there may not be enough of them. And I think, as I said, most of the leadership in the House and the Senate, and the White House for that matter, are more to the left, I think, than where the American public is. But any rational person who looks at the economy would say you cannot raise taxes in the middle of a recession. And that's what this would do. And even if you just say we're going to allow the tax cuts to expire for people who make more than $200,000 if they're single, or $250,000 if they're married, you're still talking about raising taxes on a lot of small businesses in the middle of a recession.
Are we going to have this discussion on the Hill about this Bush tax cut, whether it expires after the midterms? Or will we have the courage to have this discussion on the table before the midterms so that the American people can sort of weigh in with their votes?
Well, I think I'd like to get it resolved as soon as we possibly can, because my fear is if we get to the election and you get into a lame duck, and depending on what happens in the elections, there may not be the impetus to do this. And if we get into the year next year, and then you've got the problem we have this year, for example, when the death tax expired at the end of last year, and now we're 6-7 months into the year, and you've got all these people who have estates that haven't settled or have settled, and they don't know what the tax laws are. And I think that if you're going to make any plans, and this is where small businesses are really asking for certainty, what they're saying is, you've got to give us some certainty. We can't plan, and I think they need to know whether the tax cuts are going to expire or whether they're not going to expire.
So why can't everybody do it now? Because you can wait until right near election, or you can do it after the midterm, but that puts the small businesses 6 months more behind the 8 ball. The small businesses are trying to decide what to do, or even big businesses, or anybody, even any family planning in terms of college educations. What are you all waiting for?
Well, that's a good question, and we don't control the agenda around here. But if the Democrats wanted to enter into a discussion about how to extend these tax cuts, the Republicans would be more than willing to do that. We believe that 50% of all small business income is going to be subject to those two top tax rates, and so you're going to see your 35% rate go up to 39.6 and 33 to 36. So small businesses are going to see significant tax increases at a time when they're trying to pull us out of this recession. And I think there should be, and there would be, I think the Republicans would welcome this if we could do something on this. There's some discussion about having this debate in September before the election, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I hope that the Democrat leadership will decide to do it.
All right.